Welcome to the Myofascial Health Podcast, hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' myofascial release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health Podcast. Now, I'm joined here by a very special guest. She comes from an education background. She got her Bachelor's of Science in Education, and then she became a MFR client and patient in 2004, which prompted her to get her massage license. And she started her own practice in 2009 and has since developed an online course having to do with self-care. It's my pleasure to introduce Abigail Southgate. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Thank you.
Yeah, so can you give us a introduction on how you got into myofascial release?
Yes, I can. And it was life-changing. I had 6.5 years of undiagnosed phantom pain that was all right here and like a knife going through the side of my head. And I went through the whole gauntlet of Western medicine and bite plates and teeth being pulled and injections. I finally had my nerves burned. And you wouldn't even really recognize me. I was curled up. My whole side of my body was starting to just kind of shut down. And my primary at the time was like a hub for me. If anything new came around, she'd say, hey, go try this. And so at one point she said, there's this guy in town. He's doing something new. Go see him. And I was like, ugh, I just can't stand it. But I waited 3 months to get into him. This was 2004. And I got in. Two things happened. First, he listened to my sad story and then asked me if I'd ever had any abdominal surgery. And I thought he was a nut. I was like, no, did you not listen? Everything's here. But then when he got me on the table, did a side release on my side, it made my head hurt, and nothing had ever impacted it directly like that. It had always just been floating around here. And I'd been heavily medicated for years. And so that got my attention. And then the other thing that happened that day is he handed me the yellow ball and said that, you know, the more I lay on the yellow ball, the faster I'd heal, and that it was my responsibility to heal myself, and that, you know, he was just supporting my healing. And I was just blown away because no one had ever said that to me. So now I'm in this session and I'm learning that my whole body is one thing, which seems asinine to have thought that it ever wasn't. And that I can heal myself. So I was like, sign me up. I'm here. And so I worked with him for 3 years. And then at that point, other things were shifting pretty drastically in my life. And I decided to go to massage school, having never had a full body massage. And then the rest was just all training with John and myofascial release.
I love that. Now, okay, you're struggling with this pain that you described as feeling like a knife is being jabbed through the side of your head. And you're looking for a solution to end your suffering. And so you've gone through all these Western medicine channels. You feel lost. What kept you going and saying, hey, this next thing, would be the thing that works? And I have my own experiences with Western medicine failing me multiple times. You get to a point where you're like, I don't know if this, you kind of lose hope. So what allowed you to still have that and trust and then move forward to this kind of life-altering decision?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question. My family, I think. Really, I mean, we were living at Crater Lake National Park, so it's pretty isolated. And 3 very young kids. This pain started when my youngest child was 3. And I just had to get up every morning. And people are like, oh, those kids, that's so hard on you. And I was like, no, they are saving my life. Like, if I didn't have them, I don't know what I would do. And then now he's my former husband, but he was always very supportive of me trying new things. So I wanted to get better. I didn't want to be in pain the rest of my life. So it was the support of my family and then my doctor at the time. And yeah, but it's really true. Like if you've had this journey, I don't actually know your journey, but you go and they say they can fix you and you feel better for a day or two and then it comes back. It's very depressing and you do lose hope. And so by the time I found myself in a myofascial release practice, I was just there because everybody wanted me to go. I didn't listen to anything he said. I'm like looking at my watch, and then big surprise, in that moment, my whole life changed. But really, it was the support of my family. And I guess I have a deep desire to change and grow.
I love that. And something you had mentioned is you're given this yellow ball. And in myofascial release community, you get these little 4-inch or 6-inch squishy yellow balls, and you learn to love that thing. I, like many others, could use it more than I do. And something that's very different with myofascial release is it is on purpose a squishier ball. It's not a very firm ball. And I believe that that's because the fascial system responds to that gentle pressure. It's not forcing through the tissues. It's not jamming something in and scraping it along. It's, hey, can you melt your fascial system around the ball instead of, hey, can you jab this ball into this area that hurts and have it release you, you know? So there is a purpose to that. And I think the more deeper we go into myofascial release, the more deeper connection we have to this squishy yellow ball. Now, something that you had mentioned was, you were going through this journey of healing and you got told, hey, everyone's telling you to go there. Sometimes I find that if the patient isn't there for their own genuine being, like they are the one that's initiating that, sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect. So they're not there because they want to be there. They're there because other people have told them to be there. And for me, it's like, okay, I can only help you as much as you're willing to help yourself. And if you don't want to be here, there's not a whole lot that I can do. How are you able to make that shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think I see that in my practice too at this point. It was the piece of me that didn't want to be hurting anymore. That got me in the door and the pressure of my community. But the touch was totally different. I mean, I was like a piece of concrete. I lived in a corner folding laundry. I was so disassociated, except for nature. I mean, we lived in a national park and I spent, all my time outside. But so I could feel the difference of the touch and the intention. And so like when he first dropped in, on my thigh and I could feel my fascial system, I was like, this is different. This feels different. And then I don't know when it all started to happen, but the dialoguing of, come in and feel the space underneath my hand, like it was such a profound invitation for me to actually come in and feel my body. I'd never had that before. I mean, right? Like, come in and feel your body? What? What are you talking about? And so that guiding me in brought me to a ton of pain and a ton of, long held restrictions and beliefs and all the things that we're able to offload through this work. But before all of that, it started to take away my pain pattern because we were releasing these restrictions. I had nerve damage between C2, C3. Like that was there, but it was a symptom of the tightening from my scar from my C-section. So as soon as we started working and releasing the restrictions, I could just feel it, right? I mean, you've experienced, it was like, this is different. And on session 4, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't hurt. And I could feel that potential in my body. So very quickly, it had me. I'm like, I'm here, girl. You gonna help me feel better? I'm in. I mean, I took that yellow ball home and I laid on that. Or I put the kids in front of the TV and I just laid on that for my psoas and all the scar tissue for like, I don't know, an hour a day.
That's awesome. And that is just the amount of commitment that I think is necessary. I think John will say spend at least 5 minutes a day if that's all you've got. But obviously, if you can spend more than 5 minutes on self care, then your body, mind, and spirit have even more to gain from that. Now, something that comes to mind for me is, I think in Western medicine, we learn everything in parts, and John calls this fragmentation. We'll break things down into smaller and smaller components, and we believe that if we understand things at the smallest components, then we'll thereby understand things at the larger components. And that's not necessarily true, especially when you start looking at the fascial system, where it's like it doesn't just go from point A to point B. And what you recognize is it works in fractals, which you'll see outside in nature all the time. And so if we believe that we're part of nature, then we should believe that we're not just these linear beings. And even though we understand things at the smallest components, someone like John, and there's many others who put everything back together and say, hey, this is the human being. Your foot can't affect your neck. Or what you've experienced is a C-section scar that you had 10 years ago can directly relate to this pain that you're feeling in the side of your head. And without that felt experience, it's tough for people to conceptualize that because it's so far apart. And I think that's the difference with myofascial release than many other modalities. It's a felt sense. You can talk about it. I'm spreading this information through this podcast to help you understand the knowledge and the body of work that John has created. But until you feel what it feels to have a release, you're not going to get it. You can only learn how to ride a bike by riding a bike, but you can read about how to ride a bike, but there's nothing going to be the same. Like, oh man, I got to balance this thing and I got to look both ways. And if there's cars and steering and braking, until you feel that, you're not going to know. I think you just described it so perfectly. And like many of us, we are looking for solutions to our own pains. Now, you've got this introduction to myofascial release. It helped release these restrictions and these traumas that you had. And then you were prompted to then change the direction of your life? Or how did you come into that where you're like, this is the thing that I want to start doing?
I love what you just said. It's totally true. We have to feel it. And I think that's actually part of what happened for me was that I couldn't survive in my old life because now I was feeling and I'd felt the releases and I'd felt that space that was creating in my being and my curiosity. So I'd been married for 30 years and then we had a total house fire. And then a year later ended up getting divorced. And so it was sort of like when I look back now, it's been like almost 16 years. I'm like, oh my gosh, like Source just opened up this huge window for us to all go through, as I was changing. So then everybody else around me changes. But that's what I was just like, if I could help people learn how to get out of their pain patterns and begin to create vibrant lives again, what else would there be for me to do? And to teach people about the fascial system and share this work with people, it was really humbling for me because I have not been a seeker. I haven't read spiritual books. I'm not a healthcare person at all, like body fluids. You'll find me passed out in the corner. I was just taken on this journey. I really feel like I was because I'm like, what? At I massage school, you're killing me. But it works. And I think part of the reason that I'm able to do it is that because I was a client and I did receive it. And so I get it. Like if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't be doing this work. The reason I can do it is because John says all the time, his voice, if you walk into the treatment room and you know what you're going to do, you have no idea what you're doing. And that's like my mantra because I'm not doing anything. I could segue into this life of just trusting this work.
I could not agree with you more. Now, something that comes to mind is oftentimes we'll come against some challenges and some obstacles. And I think you looking back now, you can say, hey, that prepared me for this next journey of my life. But in the moment, I'm sure it felt very different. So can you take us back to that time and, maybe it sounds like you had this fire come through, going through a divorce. Those sound like very emotionally draining experiences. And so how are you able to kind of get through that? And what were the lessons that you learned from it?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great questions. I think it's really gosh, I'm going to just loop this into my contemplation these days. I believe that the reason that I was able to do that, one was that it was what I was being called to do, but it was because I was embodied. Like I could feel my body for the first time. And I think the fire was in '08. And so then, yeah. And then in '09, I had my license and I'd had all the years of MFR. So I think that the reason I could continue on in spite of all of that was one, I was feeling. So when I was emotionally wrecked, I just allowed myself to go fetal on the floor and cry. I don't hold things in anymore. I fully experience. And then when you're in a body that's kind of vibrant and awake and alive, and you're going to go towards joy, right? You're actually not going to choose to go down into the dark, scary cave if you have a choice. And so that new experience of being human and informed in this body is what guided me to keep going. And I really think that's important. We could talk about this. I mean, we're living in a really incredible time on the planet. And I think what's missing, and this also inspires me for my class, is I think that a lot of the training, spiritual and martial arts, we abandon our bodies, right? We just leave our bodies. And I don't think we can get to the next level without our form. And I think that's what myofascial release is. Maybe John just knows this and is just trying to wake us all up as fast as he can, but bringing our body with us and getting it so that people can feel and then be able to respond to what they want to do. Because if you're just in your head, you can't discern as much. Do you agree? Does that make sense?
100%. The problem that I have is sometimes I get stuck in my head. I'm trying to weigh the pros and the cons and say, oh, this is the decision I should make. And we should always watch ourselves when we're saying should or supposed to. And that's just my nature, versus I think what John challenges us to do, and I think this is something that maybe you've gotten very acquainted with, is if you just quiet yourself and get out of your head of weighing the pros and cons and saying, how do I feel about this direction and how do I feel about this other direction? And as long as it's going to take you towards your ultimate calling or your ultimate goal, there's many pathways to take, and I'll get myself in trouble when I get fixated on just one pathway, and I'll say, "This is the way it has to be done." And then I close myself off to all these other opportunities because 'cause I'm hell-bent on this one way. Versus I think what you've stated and what John teaches us is if you are just quiet and you're still, then the answers will reveal themselves to you because it's always trying to guide you, whether you feel like it's your intuition or source, or for me, it's God. It's all guiding you towards this one path, but it might not look like the way that you want it to. And I think it relates to an important lesson that John teaches us, which is detach from the outcome. I think a lot of times we feel like we have to fix our patients, our clients, but as you gain more experience, just like you so beautifully stated, you're not fixing anyone. You're just changing the environment for them to help heal themselves.
Yeah.
That's all you're doing. So I think John has stated this where he's like, I'm not a healer. I just kind of change this environment that allows them to heal themselves. That resonates with me because that's all we're doing. We can't heal somebody, but if we can change the environment in which they live within their bodies, and you might be challenged with, hey, there's also environmental factors, there's relationship factors, there's different traumas, whether it's physical or emotional, that you will have to brush up against and feel, and which is very scary and it's very vulnerable. But I think something that you've stated that I think can never be overstated is you need to get treated yourself, because the more you are acquainted with the work, that's you feeling it, then you will also be able to administer it. And so it's this exchange. It's kind of like this two-way channel. And so, yes, I completely agree with you. And I think it's just another important lesson to remind ourselves is follow your joy. There is this innate feeling of joy that we definitely knew as kids that we kind of outgrew as we turned into adults. And I would just say that joy is different than happiness. I think sometimes people will say,
Yeah.
"Hey, are you happy with this?" Or, different things like that. And I think happiness comes and goes based on the circumstance. Like, won an award, and in that moment, I was happy. But then that fades. And so if you're only chasing happiness, it's going to be a shallow well to drink from versus if it's this joy where it's like, man, something about this just lights me up. And that's all you have to follow. And that's your intuition. Then that will simplify things. And I think that's something that you've learned at a later point in life, but it just is a good reminder for all of us, no matter what age you are or what chapter of life you're in. If you could just remember that, man, what are the things that give me joy? And have I continued to foster those things and allowed those things to continue to be part of my life? Or did I convince myself that, hey, I had to work more, I had to do these things, and then that joy kind of fades, but it's always there and it's always going to be there. You just have to open it and allow yourself to feel that and follow it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, and it is like it's okay to get distracted or to have, like you said, like, "I'm gonna just really commit to this one path." And I think that when we're in these bodies that have had a lot of myofascial release, if that path is not gonna be all the way to where you wanna be, don't you think that joy or that like, you can start to feel yourself tightening, and you can start to feel yourself cut off, and sometimes, like, I bash into the brick wall and the pattern of it is in my forehead before I back out. But I am self-aware enough that I can back out and then find another path. You must feel that too, right? That like even if you're so focused, if it ends up not being the joyful path or the one that you like, oh, I didn't expect this, we can then back out as witnesses to our lives and find something else in a more joyful way. Does that make sense?
It does. And it seems like you are more familiar with your intuition than myself because there are certain things that I will convince myself, like, oh man, I'm going to do this thing. For example, I'm setting up my own clinic and I am building this dividing wall. And it's cool to use these tools and make something with your hands and to feel proud of it. But is it taking me a lot of time? And then does that put some extra pressure on myself that maybe I don't need? Absolutely. But I don't think that it goes to waste, and I hope that going through this process, I'll be able to look back and say, "Man, that was worth it." And maybe it wasn't joyful all the time, but I was able to commit to something. I created a picture in my head, and I brought that to life. And I think there's something that feels really good about that, that allows me to do things, but I think what I am learning from you is no matter what path you're on, you can always take a step back and check in with yourself. Because I think sometimes I get so stubborn and I'm like, I have to do this. This is something that I've maybe put on myself where it's like, don't start something you can't finish. And so if I start it, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to finish it. And there's some stubbornness there, and I think sometimes I get myself into trouble because I will then start to sacrifice certain parts of my life that are joyful, because I have to get through this. And I think there are seasons where, hey, if you're gonna try to do something like start a business, you're gonna make sacrifices. But I think what I'm learning from you or am reminded with you is like, and with that, you can always check back in with yourself and make sure you don't lose yourself in this sacrifice and this quote unquote suffering that you're putting on yourself. And so I think I love what you're saying is like, yeah, there's going to be seasons of that. And once you're through that season, make sure you don't live there forever and check in with yourself so that you make sure that, hey, you're on the path that brings you this fulfillment, this joy, this feeling sense versus, hey, there's going to be all these opportunities to be busy. We created a culture where you're just busy all the time, but that doesn't mean you're living a life worth living. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And that made me remember one thing that I think you probably have is to have a good why. Why am I doing this? Like, we never ask why in the treatment room. But, like, if we're gonna put the wall in, or we wanna start a clinic, or I'm going to teach self-care classes and I'm gonna do an online, like, why? Why do I wanna do that? So unpacking that, and then having it be very clear. I write my whys down, because then I'll be like, "Oh, I don't wanna do this anymore. What was I thinking?" Like, "This mall is great, but it's taking me forever. Why am I d Oh, because I want to have built my clinic myself, and I wanna have my energy in here, and how fun is it gonna be when my client patients are here and I'm looking at the space and it's something that I made myself," like that. And so for me, with my courses, it's like, oh, right. I really want to share myofascial release out into the communities, and to help people who might be getting burned out in their practices expand their options. And yeah, so creating a very sound why that you can go back to when you're feeling like, oh, what am I doing? Can really help with that.
I think that's beautifully stated. I know we do stay away from the why questions in the treatment room because it just gets people in their heads. With that being said, there's a business leader. His name is Simon Sinek. He wrote this book called Start With Why. And the basic premise of the book is people don't care what you do until they know why you do it, you know? And so that's, I think, what you are kind of reflecting back on. And it's like there's going to be these challenging moments in life where you're going to question, am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing? But if you have a strong why, that will be your guiding light. And that will be the thing that you refer back to. And I completely agree. The better and deeper your why is for the reason you're doing what you're doing, the easier it will be to get through those difficult moments because it's meaningful to you. It's not just a superficial, oh, I'm just building a clinic just to say I built a clinic. No, it's to serve those who I have the honor of serving. And this clinic will help me facilitate that process more. And with that, I'm in the beginning stages of opening my own clinic, building up the space. Can you share your experience with what it was like to build your own practice from yourself to then hiring and what that was like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was not aware enough to have a why back then. I was in such uncharted territory. I'd never had a business. And so for me, it was like full steam ahead. I'm going to do this. I'm going to create this. This is my image. And I didn't take the time to create, why am I doing this? And I think if I had done that, I would have been able to have a model that was more sustainable for me. And it was also lovely. I got so much experience. It was incredibly successful. I mean, that's one of the things about myofascial release is it just works. So, people come and they refer. I loved my space. I had 3 treatment rooms, and it was word of mouth business. So after a while, my waiting room would be like everybody knew each other. And so I did create this beautiful community, but I didn't do it mindfully. And I didn't do it in a way that would be sustainable for me. I hadn't been able to get that piece together yet. If unsolicited advice, really figure out your why, build into the practice personal growth and expansion, play and fun, and also the ability to kind of fade back and be like, okay, so now what? What do we want to add to this? What would be fun to shift around here? And Adyashanti, he's a Buddhist teacher, I think. Anyway, he said something that was always after I had already closed my practice. He said that humans have a tendency to institutionalize everything that we make and create. And then after a certain amount of time, we focus on just keeping the institution going rather than allowing it to be a vibrant, living thing that's going to change. And I definitely feel like that's what I did. I was like, I have to see this many clients. I have to have this many people for my people. Like the structure that I created was in concrete. And so if it could have been more playful, I think it would have been more successful.
Okay.
Not successful, sustainable.
So, okay, let me get some clarity on certain things because you described this business as being successful, generating revenue, but you didn't do it mindfully, which wasn't able to last sustainably. Now, what would you say were the mindful things that were missing? Was it this play, this allowing it to be its own alive thing, so there's gonna be changes? Or is it a different matter of, like, just I needed to have a stronger why?
Yeah, I think, well, fundamentally for me and my personality, I don't want to get too woo woo on anybody, but in human design, I'm a projector. So I can blast out a ton of energy and create and manifest, and then I burn out. And that's just, and it's like, oh, that's actually a thing in my design. And so if I had known that I was a projector, I would have not put myself in the place of doing the lion's share of all the treating and the revenue generating. I would have created a model that allowed me to have more, like, even start my classes back then. That would have been so good for me to have enough energy to breathe, to be able to be creative with what I would like to do. And I love to teach and be around a lot of people. So that there was no space for any of that. And at that time, I was just finishing up teaching at the community college. It's not like I hadn't taught. I'd homeschooled my kids. Like, teaching is always really close, but I was so focused on the revenue and driving the business, I created it in a model that was unsustainable for me, my sole being. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess for me, how did you know that? Because you're saying, "Hey, I was able to start my own practice," and word of mouth spread like wildfire to the point where I was able to hire not just one therapist, but 2 therapists to start helping me. And so for me, starting my own clinic, I'm like, "That's awesome. That sounds like what I'm trying to do." But I'm trying to glean from your wisdom because you're saying, even though I got these things, I manifested these things, and I was quote unquote successful, there was a huge part of my soul that was dying. And so I'm just trying to ask for clarity of like, how do you make sure that you don't fall into that? And I think what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, you're building this business machine and it feels like you got to feed into it and feed into it. And I think something that can get lost is you have to remember that you're building your business to sustain a life that you want to live. And if you forget that, then it kind of turns into this big machine that you constantly feed into. And then that becomes your identity versus having that mindset to be like, yes, I'm building this machine so that it can help me sustain the life that I want to lead. And I think that you got burnt out, which sounds normal. I think that is something that I fear because I'm like, yeah, it requires a lot of energy to build a business, much less manage other people, much less do all these different things, make sure I'm doing the right things for the family and all these things. And I think I can resonate with you where it's like, I'm going to burn myself out. So you get to this place where you're like, even though I've built this successful business, it's not exactly who I want to be. How are you able to step away from that?
You have made some really good points. I just want to touch back on that. I didn't have the awareness that my business was supposed to support my life outside of my business, right? And I was coming off of, a divorce and all of that. I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of like what I've created now is way more it's more sustainable. But what I did is I basically just told everybody, I ended up getting space for a couple of days a week to transition in a different facility. I rented a room. And then I just told my clients that I was closing, and I gave 4 months. And then a certain number of them were able to book with me who wanted to. The funny thing is I still see people here in my practice. I'm in the same town. And so I still have clients from back then. Myofascial Release is incredible. And then I just did it. I mean, I just did it. I had to. I couldn't do it anymore. And then I'm not serving my people authentically, right? When you're just done. Yeah, and people were, pretty surprised, but then understanding, and it just I referred a lot of people out, and I just did it.
So I guess for me, if I was in that position, there'd be a lot of chatter in my head of being like, "You built this thing, you put all this energy towards this, and are you really gonna let it go?"
Well, it's the projector that I didn't know I was.
Okay.
If you look at human design, it was like, "Oh, of course, that was unsustainable for me, and I couldn't do it."
Mhm.
And so when you're done, you're done.
Interesting. So it was just literally a feeling you're like, "I'm done with this, I'm moving on."
Yeah, and also remember that this was, like, in this huge awakening in my life, right? I'd come from the 32 years homeschooling the kids, teaching math at the community college, I was just in this other world. I kinda just recreated it again in my business, and I don't wanna live like that. So I think what you said earlier was really important and helpful for me because it wasn't the life I wanted to live. It was like how they say if you're in a relationship and you break up and you get into another one right away, you're gonna just create the same thing?
Yeah.
I'm just now getting this aha. It's like I just moved out of my marriage and into my business and created the same limiting, confining, exhausting structure. And I was like, "No, I don't want I'm not doing that." I never stopped treating people. I never stopped doing myofascial release. But yeah, that's fascinating. Thank you.
You're very welcome, and I think that is very wise. I think we have subconscious patterns that will shape our realities. But until you take a step back and do that internal reflection, this inner journey that John challenges us to go on, then we'll just recreate our dysfunction. And so you went through this awakening process where you were saying, "Hey, I don't want to do this," you know? And how did you find that next journey? Like, did you even know it existed or did it just kind of happen? Because I would imagine there's a lot of question marks. Like, okay, I'm giving up this business. I don't want to do this anymore. But then how do you transition to the next thing?
Well, I blew up my whole life. I closed my practice. I rented out my condo. I bought a 24-foot RV and I went on the road. And that was brutal. Like the first month in my RV on the Oregon coast, I don't know how if I've ever cried so much and questioned what I was doing and how could I leave my kid. I mean, it was just like I don't know what made me think that was ever gonna be a good idea. But then, I saw the kids 3 weeks later. It was just like but it was very, very cleansing. And during that time, I think the most that I learned in the beginning of crawling in I call her Haven. She was my safe haven. I loved her. I lived in her for 10 years. But I was given the invitation to interact with my monkey mind. And so I was totally alone for the first time, probably in my life. And I could watch my thoughts just come around like on a merry-go-round. It's like, "Oh, here's that thought. Oh, here it come oh, here it's the other one." And in that isolation and loneliness, I was still feeling because I have MFR and my fascia's alive, and I was able to be like, "Okay, this is ridiculous. We've gotta get a handle on these thoughts." And I was able to unwind that pattern that my mind had. It was like self-flagellation, just circling. So that was really valuable. And then after that, it was probably about a month. Then I went around and landed in places that I was just called to, and I would find a place to treat, work with massage therapists locally, and then go somewhere else. There were a few times that I'm in the Rogue Valley in Southern Oregon, and I kept ending up like, oh my gosh, I'm 10 miles from where I started. And then I'd leave again. I lived in Eastern Oregon for a while, had, a practice there. So I guess I just never knew what was going to happen next. And I got really comfortable with that. And so when I end up making decisions, I get nervous because I'm like, but what else might be able to happen? What am I limiting myself? So I've been on a walkabout for sure.
So one, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to be alone, and whether you call that meditation or something else. But something that you mentioned was you were able to get into what I refer to as the observer position. You know,
Yeah.
you're not your thoughts, but can you get into a place where you're observing your thoughts? And then instead of kind of grasping onto these thoughts that maybe lead to emotions, you could just sit with that. And then for you, you can kind of just be aware, oh man, this is a pattern. So what would happen if I reshape this pattern that I find myself getting into? And as a rock climber myself, we learned this because when you're climbing, there is this legitimate fear of falling.
Yeah.
And so these thoughts, these fearful thoughts will come into your brain, and then you will find your body like over gripping because you're scared. And then that's going to waste energy. Versus if you can just focus on the climb and trust it, it's not going to feel secure all the time, but you can move through that. And something I think that you mentioned that I think is very important is being able to move through uncertainty and being okay with the outcome. I think so many of us want that certainty. We want to know that if we do X thing, that the Y thing will be the outcome. And you're going to find out with enough life experience that it's not going to happen that way many times.
Yeah.
And instead of being fixated onto the certainty that we all kind of want, what I hear with you is, man, I'm uncertain and I'm comfortable here. Instead of wanting to this outcome, you're just saying, the more still I am, the more opportunities will arise until that last present moment happens where you're like, I have to make this decision and then moving forward to the next thing. So
Yeah.
I think that's important for all of us, especially, the state of the economy. There's a lot of uncertainty. So there's a lot of fear in the air. And so then that might make you play small, like, oh man, I just want to have this job because it gives me this certainty. Versus for you, it's been easier to take these risks because maybe it's in your human design, I think you had said. But I think it's also just this factor. It's like you've had enough experience of being uncertain, not knowing what that next thing is, and then seeing that it play out okay. And so now when you're confronted with this feeling of uncertainty, you're like, I've been here before and it's
It-
worked out every time. Now, along this journey of you kind of finding yourself, you're driving off the coast in your RV. How did you come upon this idea to create your own online course?
Okay, that's a great question. I love your rock climbing.
Thank you.
I don't rock climb, but I'm a skier, and I love that because it's like what do we do enough that can captivate our mind and our attention in the present moment that's, exhilarating. So, like, everybody go see if you can find that. It's really important. Okay, so for me, what happened to me is I was living in Tahoe teaching skiing at North Star when COVID hit. And actually, I'd been at Fascial Cranium and like a bunch of I got COVID. It was right before the shutdown. And we came home from that. I have never been so sick in my life. But I was going to move there and start my practice. I'd moved there and I was living in my RV and I had a place I was working doing MFR and teaching skiing. And then when COVID hit, it was like the big voice was like, you're too old for to live like this anymore. Like, you need to get your act together. So I moved back to the Rogue Valley, which is where I kept trying to get away from. I end up here all the time. And in that moment, I really heard the voice, and it was like, it's time for you to just offer your work. I think I've been with Heather like 2 years. Anyway, but I think it's partly this place in my life and having been a practitioner for 15 years. But when I really settled back in here and started doing my one-on-one, I couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't teaching self-care and that I was shorting my clients and it just wouldn't go away. And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to start. It's not a technique class. Everybody's doing really good technique classes. The world doesn't need that. I want to teach people how to feel. And so that's when I started creating the 3-hour self-care workshops. And so I had my first one And my clients all came. I think there were like 16 people in the room, and they're lying down there on the floor in their balls, and they're softening in. And I am the one that is like, oh my gosh, this is so long. But what I realized that day is that they loved it. And they could, with dialoguing and support and time, they were able to find their barrier, wait at it, and create the releases themselves. And so by the end of that first 3 hours, they were like, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. And I said, you did it yourself. Like, you just gave yourselves the most amazing treatment. And so then every month after that, for like 2 years, I've been doing it. I'm on a little bit of a break right now. It's just filled the gap in my heart of what I haven't been honoring in the work that we do. And so then I thought, oh my gosh, well, if I could teach people how to do their own workshops, that would be even more amazing. Had I known about marketing, not sure I would have done it. But let me tell you, I go back to my why a lot because it's important. And it really is one of the things I think is going to change the world, because if we can share in not such a intense one-on-one session for people and teach them and guide them into their own presence, their own still point, their own release, that then they can do it whenever they want, and they're going to start to be embodied, and it's going to change the world because we need to reconnect in. So that's a lot.
That was beautiful. And something that I just need to reiterate is if you detach from the outcome, you allow these opportunities to arise, you know? I don't think that online courses have been taught for myofascial release, but I am hearing that more and more therapists are getting into this line of work, which I think does a big part in just spreading the work. Now, that being said, I don't think you should ever do it before taking myofascial release seminars, because there is a real felt experience. Like, can you feel what it feels like to be centered, to be present?
Can I just, the online course is for therapists to learn how to offer the 3-hour workshop. I'm not sure I was clear about that.
Yeah, so you have
No, you need to be, it's all about being able to feel it and
got
the
it.
presence of a therapist. And yeah, but it's so that the therapist, so you in your new space, if you had room, could offer for your client patients to do the workshops.
100%.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was clear.
Yeah, you're very clear. I was just saying it's important to learn myofascial release first so that you can feel these
Oh
things
yeah.
versus if I were just to sign up for your course and I'd never taken a myofascial release seminar, I think there'd be a huge disconnect. Is that fair to say?
I think at some level there is, although yes, probably. But I also feel like a lot of consciousness awareness is going on in the world right now, and fascia is kind of a thing. Like
Yeah.
when I started this years ago, nobody even knew what you were talking about. And it's coming online and people are learning about it. So I wouldn't limit people, but I totally agree with you at a different way. I mean, I think there's people that intuitively engage the fascia. But no, my target people for this is myofascial release therapist for sure.
Absolutely.
Because when you're sitting there for 3 hours and you have like 5 positions that your people are in, you've got to understand what's happening down there on the floor with your students. You've got to know that that time is essential, and that's really the most important thing that you're offering, and be able to support that. And I agree with you 100%. If you haven't had much myofascial release or that this kind of work, you're gonna not really understand it so well.
Now, let me ask you, how do you guide someone to feel the barrier? Let's say that they're not very aware of their own bodies, they're super tight. What is that introduction?
So, I mean, we could do it now, but it's almost exactly what I do on the table. I have 6 right now. I'm working on a few more fully fleshed out lesson plans. And in each lesson plan, there is a video to describe the positions. And so I've worked pretty intentionally to create positions for people to be in with props, that will engage their fascia. And up until recently, everybody in the room has been a client or is a therapist. There's a bunch of therapists around here and they come to the workshop. But then so it's basically like let your body soften in, not to releasing, but soften into feeling the tight places. There must be something that might be hot or tender. Breathe. See if you can find a place that's hurting. Rest there. Let yourself feel the pain. If you get bored, move a tiny bit. Often the pain will just go away. These kinds of things. But the beginning of the workshop, we jiggle and we do self-unwinding, and then there's a guided meditation. So by the time we're working in our body, their system is up and running. And so it makes it a little bit less sort of like, okay, just lay on the ball.
Yeah.
We're in a pretty safe environment and ready to feel. And I tell you what, people will be on there in a position. I mean, I'm just so humbled and impressed by the people that come to class because they'll be there for 30 minutes.
Wow.
Breathing and releasing and moving and switching. And I'm just walking around. I try really hard not to touch anybody. If I get a little nervous with the time, I will go just like at the seminars, people put energy in, I'll do that. The one thing I do is help people get comfortable. But I tell you what, they'll just be there and they'll have their releases and then we'll do the next one for 30 minutes and they just do it again. It works.
I love that. And I think sometimes I'll be in a rush. So I'll do workshops sometimes and they'll be an hour versus a 3-hour workshop where like they could just feel the releases for 30-minute blocks, where I just didn't have that time. But even in the limited time that I had for my workshop, you'd be surprised at how many people are able to engage with their barriers and feel myofascial release, even if they've never had it. Now, it does take a sense of stillness, so there's going to be people who are, oh man, I want this to be done quick. I thought I was going to, it's like, and you're not going to make everybody happy. But for the majority, when they feel those releases and they're going deeper to a place that they've just never been given the permission to feel, there is magic that just happens from that. Now, how has teaching this work changed you as a practitioner or even a human being?
That's a great question because we can go back to my practice. I love it. And so it's just inspired me outside of my treatment room. Plus, I make money. I charge for it. I charge what my hourly rate is, I charge for the 3-hour. So I'm getting rewarded financially. But it's also just really fun for me to be in community and to support other people in their journeys as they're learning to heal themselves, because it's kind of the point. And then the other thing I didn't actually expect, which I probably should have, is that it's changed the way my treatments go with the people that take the class. And they're more, for lack of a better word, empowered. And they can come in with a more sort of refined felt sense of where they are in their body and the restrictions and what they'd like to work on. And then they also are not as afraid of their pain. And so there'll be one guy in particular, he likes to play golf and then his back goes out and he can't play golf. And he was like, I was out there on the golf course and my back started to go out and, I just went up into a tree and I leaned against it and I softened in and it released and I was able to finish. Like those words never would have come out of his mouth if we hadn't had the workshop. And that's just one example that always made me smile because he was so like, no. But what I want to say about the people like in your workshop, I believe it's because they've engaged their fascial system is what allows us to quiet. It's the pause. And we finally pause and quiet, and have that fascial system engaged. That's when the body can relax and begin to reorganize itself. And even for an hour, not even beautiful for an hour, even people that are uncomfortable, dialogue a little bit with how you feel uncomfortable. Like it's, it's like, it's so awesome because they're learning how to be in their bodies.
100%. And I think because you've had your own personal experiences, you can speak to that to a certain depth that those who have never been through injuries or traumas or surgeries can speak on. And I completely agree. And I think it's because, yes, you take that moment to pause. And that's all there is. Earlier in my career, I was, very ambitious in my 20s. I wanted to make a name for myself and all these things that drove me to really go after it. And it wasn't until I got introduced to myofascial release where things started to slow down. And I remember my unwindings, I would just motor through steel points. And I remember asking John, this is a pattern that I have. And he said, "Is there anything wrong with being still?" And I could answer that 'cause I said, "No, there's nothing wrong." But there's something in my body that was like, "You gotta be doing something," you know? And I think John says it beautifully where he says, "We've turned into human doings, and what we need to be are human beings." And
Yeah.
I think, just like you said, having that moment to pause and just be still allows us to reconnect with our bodies and get out of our heads, which allows us to engage the fascial system and to release these things. Now, I think that I could spend more time, and that might be something I explore a little bit because I think when I hear you speak about it, it's this beautiful thing where, hey, you get to just be here for 3 hours. You've already signed up. So there's no pressure to get done with this and move on to the next thing. And just that block alone, you said, has been very valuable for all your participants to the point where this gentleman who was on the golf course is like, not afraid of their pain. I think when you're in pain, fear is natural. But if you feel it, you can say, this isn't going to be the end of the world. And I know something that I can do to help me with this, whether that's on the ball or rubbing up against the tree. He did that. So I love that.
Yeah, he said normally he would just quit because he didn't want it to get worse.
You
But
got
I yeah, and it's like it is, I mean, pain is terrifying. And what do? We tighten, we splint around it, and then we pull our life force out, and then there it is. But if we're hungry or cold or tired or sad or, angry, well, we don't like to feel anger, but pain is just a messenger like that. And if we can learn to listen and to feel it and to go towards it rather than running away from it and isolating it, we begin to have a much richer experience in our body. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like you can feel like you're a victim of your body, like it's out to get you. And it's just not true. And so learning like this guy did that he can he can get rid of that spasm or whatever it is. I mean, that's just makes me happy to be able to share what I know and help people like that.
Absolutely. I think the more we can empower our patients, the more healing that you facilitate because it's not you doing anything to them. You're just facilitating that process.
Right.
Now, what's one thing you wish every wellness professional truly understood about fascia, feeling, and healing?
Only one?
Only one.
I think I'm gonna go back to my pain pattern and my experience there, and I'm gonna just loop right to what I got from my first session with an MFR therapist, is what I would wish that everybody knew, and that is that we are one complete whole being. There's nothing in us that's separate. There's no spot in me that you could reach in and pull something out that's not gonna be connected to my fascial web, and that nobody is gonna heal anybody but ourselves. So, just to, like, take the pressure off of trying to do anything except for hold the barrier and keep people safe. Like, there's nothing really to be done. And, I say to my clients and my community, like, least invasive to most invasive. So, myofascial release is like nothing. Like, it's just this gentle touch. Let's start here, and then you can, move down the line if you need to. But yeah, we are one whole sacred being, and it is our responsibility to participate in our thriving health.
I could not agree with that more. Now, if someone were wanting to work with you, how would they find you?
I have a website. That whole time I had that clinic, I didn't even have a sign, just so you can, we can do anything. Natural Aspects, MFR.com. And that's my website, and it has stuff to book. I am offering long sessions now and immersives, and I live in a really great destination site. So I actually have started to have people travel to work with me, and that's super exciting. And then I think I can say this. We didn't talk about this, but I wanted to put a discount out for my course. Is that okay to say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you heard about it on the podcast, do you have like links at the bottom? There'll be a code, and then there'll be $100 discount for people that hear about it through here. And then on that, we have a Facebook group that's growing in its presence and is getting more active because there's a bunch of therapists who are now putting together the workshops. And so it's becoming a community.
I love it. And how would someone find that Facebook group? What is it called?
You have to have, it's private. It's called Myofascial Health. When you enroll in the course, then you have access to the Facebook group.
Perfect.
And then I do Zooms, and I mean, I'm all about community. So the more people that want to interact, the better for me. Some people just buy the course and go away, and I never hear anything. But when we're all communicating about it is what I really enjoy.
I love that. I just want to say thank you for being open and honest on this podcast. I know I learned a bunch of things, reminded about a bunch of things, like following your joy. Something that I want to reiterate is, energy is energy, and no energy ever goes wasted. So it's interesting to hear how you started in education. You got your Bachelor of Science in Education, got into myofascial release, and then found yourself educating again, even though that's not really what most myofascial release therapists are doing. And so it just goes to show that, hey, these earlier moments in your life prepared you for this ultimate goal at the end. And these challenges that you've experienced during your life also prepare you for these moments now. And so if anyone is going through challenging seasons, you're questioning a lot of things, just remember to take a minute for yourself, be quiet, and see where your intuition guides you. And then knowing that whether you have good experiences or bad experiences, there's always lessons to be learned, and it all counts for something. Now, before we get out of here, is there any last thing you'd like to share with my audience?
I'm so touched that you're doing these podcasts, and I hadn't really known about it till recently. And I just love the sharing and the heartfelt conversations that you have with people. So that's just a kudos to you. And get on your yellow ball.
I love it. All right, Abigail, thank you so much. And you have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.